Hello everyone. You're about to listen a great episode with Jens Frank from the SWDI and myself. It's the third one that we have recorded so far, and unfortunately we ran into some technical issues. Somehow we have realized it after the recording, so in this case we are not having the video of the full length, so I've decided just to keep it the audio also on YouTube. So please forgive me for that. I'm still working and practicing my skills concerning the video podcasting. Also, somehow the upload of the audio data was not 100%, but I think it's lagging a little bit here and there still. The majority of the content will be fine to listen to. So enjoy this episode, and as always, subscribe, like, share, and let us know what you thought about it. So now, have fun with Jens Frank and me. Welcome everyone to another episode. I lost the overview. I think it's number 76 or something.
Wow, impressive.
It should have been more already, but the schedule is full of other things. But it's great to have you here, Jens. And before we warm our beers, we will just open that. Already have word finding problems, but this beer should change our...
It usually gets better with
Exactly.
every beer.
So, Prost, Gesundheit.
Skål.
Way better. So, as you can see, or the ones of you who see it, by the way, you can watch almost all of our latest episodes on YouTube. And the ones who are not watching, you have already heard Jens Frank is in the building. Jens arrived 2 days ago and is with us for a small special workshop. And I thought we just use the time as well, not just for the lectures and some practical training, but also to have another episode recorded. You've already been with me at Kynotalk for 2 times. So another milestone, the first guest for 3 times. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm very honored.
No, it's a pleasure having you here again. At this time at our new facility.
Yes, very nice.
You've been with us in Vienna a few times, and I just wanted to tell everyone what has been going on between you, SWDI, and us. So maybe some of you did the instructor courses, and before that regular online courses, and we did multiple surface or the hard surface tracking with you. We did the video directionals, and I have been in Sweden, I think 2 times at your facility. 2 times is way too, it's not enough. So we definitely have to visit you again. And this year we started our further education in the online program that you have, where we can work through your app and the progression plans there, which is a great thing. So everyone who is listening or watching, you should definitely use the App Store and check out the SWDI app for some fancy dog training, all about tracking, directionals with the laser or verbals, detection, bite work, functional obedience. And Jens is constantly working to make a bigger program. So we really appreciate this, and we have a lot to learn. And but this time we are not the students. Well, we are always students, but we organized this workshop, and we are eager to learn more and watch you train the others. So how are you doing?
Well, so far it's been very fun here. It's really a nice facility you have moved to. And and it's a small but very nice group of dog handlers.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I really enjoy it.
Great. No, I think everyone did. It's always, this is something that I have learned from training with you at the SWDI, to run through more practical exercises and have the short theoretical lectures in between, which is a nice balance, I think. So it's not just a half day of sitting in a classroom and then having a half day in the field. I think many people appreciate this. So we have definitely started to do the same thing since 4 or 5 years when we met the first time.
Especially people like we have here today who work in the armed forces or the police. When they're working as dog handlers, they're not really used to spending a lot of time sitting on their behind listening. So I think it's difficult.
Yeah,
it's difficult for me at least to have their attention for half a day in a row. It's better if we can split it up with practical sessions in between.
Definitely. So you mentioned the facility, and you travel a lot for many years. You've seen a lot. We have started a few years ago to do it almost like you. I think still you're one of the busiest people I know. And we have seen a lot, and we have had our first facility. No, actually not the first. I've had a facility in Tyrol. You've been there as well. Then in Vienna. Now we are here in Lower Austria. And it's a nice place. I think we've improved for some parts, for sure. We also lost big opportunities, talking about the surroundings. So it was an industrial zone in Vienna, which was great because we had so many buildings and streets that we could just use. We didn't have neighbors who annoyed us or felt annoyed from us because of walking the dogs along the street. Meanwhile, we have this seminar room with proper toilets and running water, and actually even the training hall is bigger than the old one. And I've seen yours in Skinnskatteberg. Is it pronounced that way?
Almost.
Yeah, never mind. What do you think, apart from the financial part, because everything costs a lot of money, but what does a training center like this, where you or we train with different kinds of clients, mainly for detection, but also for obedience or bite work, tracking, what is required to do successful training?
Well, I think a lecture room is necessary where you have warmth during this time of the year, so the people can come in here and sit down and talk, look at videos of the training they've been doing. But apart from that, I think the training hall we have in Sweden, it's good because it's enormous. It's an indoor soccer field.
Yes,
with
it's great.
With room temperature all year round, and especially in Sweden, where the weather is a bit unpredictable. That is nice when you want to train technical things. But the downside of our facility is that it's one large room of maybe 3,000 square meters. And that's not really helpful many times. So I would prefer to have the possibility, as you have done here, to create rooms inside the room. It allows for more dog teams training at the same time without distracting each other. And it also allows for more different setups and scenarios. So ideally, I would like to have a full apartment house with maybe 10 apartments where you could change things.
Yes.
But yeah, the financial side would be...
Yeah, we were thinking of seeing these module style CQB things that you can change frequently. Having this in a big hangar or in the big hall, this would be pretty cool. And it could be done, but of course it's depending on how flexibly you want to stay to change the rooms, etc., and the floors. But it's just a lot of work. So we are still working here, of course, and that's one of our biggest problems, the time to do the constructions. And on the other hand, we should work our dogs and do the workshops. But that's also what I like about this one. We wanted to do it similar in Vienna because we had this 2 floors with the containers, but we fortunately never got to do it because now we had to build everything down and back again, which was a lot of work, of course. But yeah, but is there anything that you're, for example, here, that you're missing, totally missing?
No, not really. You have the gravel field not far from here where you can practice buried targets.
Yeah, you didn't see the club yet that we are able to use.
Yes.
Which is only a minute away from here. Also, we are for the search and rescue things, etc., but also for detection and everything else. We will try to rent parts of the woods. So they belong to the state. It's federal woods. And we want to rent some hectares of it. So then we can just go there all year long, also with the clients. Which is easy, would be easy because here in Austria, you're not allowed just to go into the woods with cars. And actually, you're not allowed to let the dogs run because it's like hunting. Or the dogs could start hunting, etc. So there are many things to be aware of. And this would be great because it's also just 30 seconds by car and then you're in the woods. So we're trying to get these things done to even have a bigger opportunity to not only work in the center here, because like in our instructor class right now, we are having 12 participants and then it gets crowded.
Yes.
It still works. It's great because the dogs are getting used to work beside each other. Also, this was a nice thing in the past days because they weren't used to that. Having dogs working at the same time, only a few meters apart from each other. I think that's a big benefit. People sometimes try to avoid it, I think, because they think the dogs can't concentrate, but actually that's what we're going for. Building a dog that is able to ignore the surroundings. But of course, with 12 participants, 2 trainers, and I think one of the summer workshops, it was then 48 dogs, because everyone is bringing 2, 3, 4, 5 dogs with them. That was a crowded place.
Yes.
But I'm happy. I'm happy for now, what we have here. And it's great that you saw it. And also you saw the part in the valley on the first day, the house of Stefan, where we do the environmental things.
Yes. It's very nice.
It's basically just a broken building, an old building, but
yeah, everyone should have a rage room like that for the dogs, where you can just toss a ball and the dog have to crawl under or climb up things to fetch it.
So talking about detection, because functional obedience doesn't really need any equipment. Of course, we can add distractions and people, dogs, etc. But talking about detection, we are rather more in need of different kinds of equipment. We have the brick walls, we have the lineups, the sand wheels, even the machine that I yet haven't showed you in action. And I know that you're not a big fan of fancy equipment things, except for the Kynotalk Trainingsbeitel.
Of course, but I like gear and equipment.
Okay.
But I think most of the time when we're training detection dogs, they tend to come with side effects. And usually when people buy expensive equipment, they tend to overuse it. Like if you buy a very expensive scent wheel, you tend to use it for more things than just imprinting new odors. And usually that does not bring any benefit to a real world detection dog.
Yeah, and it also something that I have learned from not expensive equipment, but for example from the brick wall or the lineups, is that I tended to work on it too often, too long. So I built a lot of energy on it and expectancy, and it was nice to see the dogs work on it, but I couldn't immediately copy-paste this behavior to different environments, etc. So I think people get a little hang up in these contexts.
Yes, I see that a lot as well. And it's very convenient when the brick wall is standing there just to go out and do 10 minutes. But apart from making the dog a bit more tired, we really don't gain anything.
Yeah. Still, it's a really nice thing to use. And when I was in America, Cameron showed me this comic picture of, because the Americans make fun of us, of course, of us Europeans. And it was like the dogs sniffing the brick wall, and it said the brick wall operator. It's fun. It was addressed to a different trainer, but I thought it's, of course, it's just a joke. But especially if people don't really think themselves into different modules that we run through with our dogs in our progression plans, they happen to see a lot of brick wall search. But these videos are just so easy to make because you don't have to follow the dog. So you just put the tripod there and put the camera on it and just make some videos. It's fine. I understand if they think that we're mainly training on the brick wall, but that's not the case, guys. Please also check our other videos.
Now the brick wall is useful maybe for one of the first weeks of the detection dog's training, mainly to decrease the amount of odor and get the high sniffing frequency we want.
Yeah.
Because we have limited area where the dog has a high expectation to find odor, and then we can drastically decrease the odor amount very quickly and still have the dog motivated to search.
Yeah.
But apart from that, it's not really beneficial. But for that purpose, it's hard to find anything that is as beneficial as the brick wall.
For sure. We also like to train different handler exercises there, to also things that we talked about today, that and actually this is one point for itself, the handler exercises in the dog training, because we focus so much on the behavior of the dogs that we happen to run into this clever Hans effect, because in clear searches where the handler knows where the target is, they have a change of behavior before even the dog changes his behavior. And so therefore I like the brick wall to give them different tasks, because many times the dog's behavior there already is like backed up and they have an expectancy, they know what to do, and then we can ask the handlers to do different things that they maybe never need in an operational search, but it's just for them to see how on what the dog reacts, what they do. Is it movement? Is it talking? Leash handling? Things like it could happen that the dog is searching and suddenly you have a what's it called, a full stretch on the leash, and somehow the dog shows an indication because he knows it as a bridge. So we want, of course, this not to happen, and then we can work again. So I think there are many interesting things and side effects about things like that. But as you said, we don't want to stick with it too long. Is there any other equipment that you think, especially for scent detection, that's useful? And we have talked about the search consoles in one of our previous talks. So
that's useful. Now I need to think. So depends on how you define equipment, but something we often are forced to use is some kind of odor carrier, something we contaminate with a real odor, because it's difficult many times to bring explosives or narcotics into certain environments. So if you count that as equipment, I think that's something that's really important and really deserves putting a lot of thought and effort into. Apart from that, not so much, actually. Detection is not very complicated, and in many ways, dog behavior-wise, it's one of the easier tasks that we can teach the working dogs. I think the challenge is in the odors and the odor presentation in training.
And for sure, most of us, also me, should take more care about the handling of odor samples. And that was also one of your points in the past days, to take care about that, because there is, and we will get to this a little later, the danger of overshadowing, for example. But let's get to this a little later. Let's stick to this, that we have also just mentioned, the clever Hans. And we saw it a few times that, as I said, the dog handlers show a difference in their behavior before the dog does. And maybe for some listeners that are not that deep in the topic, could you explain why it's so important to also take care of the handler's behavior, and why we have these exercises to walk in a certain pace until the dog shows a fully trained indication behavior?
Yes, so in theory it's quite simple. So we want the dog to act only on cues, in obedience, or when to start searching or when to bite. And we want the dog only to indicate on a specific cue. And that is the target odor, or the range of target odors the dog is trained to search for. And in order to give the dog the opportunity to learn this, we need to restrain the handler a bit, because many handlers want to help their dog. And what they're actually doing is that they are not helping the dog, they're just teaching the dog that it will be rewarded if it responds to other cues than the actual target odor. And then we get the clever Hans effect. And many times these cues are not really deliberate. It can be that the dog handler, without knowing it, when the dog starts to come close to the target odor, the handler either stops or slows down or start walking behind the dog, because that's from where you want to deliver the reinforcement. And the dog is born to pick up on all these small cues, and especially from domestication. Dogs have been domesticated for more than 20,000 years, and we know that they are actually born with an expectation of human pointing and gazing. So they pick up on all our cues. And I have, for real, handcuffed people, and I have put tape over their face, even if they're as hairy in the face as you are, to keep them from saying things. And just to make it easier for the dog to actually learn that I'm reinforced for indicating on the target odor as a cue, not any behavior from the handler.
And that's so helpful for the dogs and for the handlers to understand that the capability of, or the task of the dog is to search for the cues in the environment to show indication behavior. And the handlers really, like, they should observe and their part is maybe to send the dog again here or there where they missed a spot, or could search again, but not teaching them, like it's not an obedient task to follow the hand until the cue is given there.
No, and especially in the beginning of the detection training, this is important, that the dog gets a chance to respond to the target odor. But then later on in the detection training, when the dog has learned that, yes, the trigger for me to indicate, that is the target odor, nothing else, then we need to bring the dog handler back in. So then we have let's go down this rabbit hole.
Yeah, sure.
So we have the POD, the probability of detection. So you need to decide that when you start training a dog. What is the probability of detection I want? So do I want, if there are 100 targets, or I search 100 cars that contain narcotics or explosives, do I expect the dog to find 90% of the explosives, or 80%, or 95%, or 70%? And that's important to decide, because that will influence your search pattern. So when you have set your POD, the probability of detection, you need to decide what is the minimum reliable distance where your dog will actually pick up on the target odor. So some odors are more volatile than others. And then if you're searching for explosives, you should dimension this from the least volatile odor. So let's say when you test searching for a specific explosive, your dog needs to be within 5 centimeters from the odor before it's reliably actually picking up on it. And then it may or may not go into indication. But then if you have your POD of 70% and you have this minimum distance of 5 centimeters, that means you as a handler needs to bring the dog to within 5 centimeters of at least 70% of the places where there could be target odors hidden. Because we can never make the dog understand this. So the dog has the nose, but you unfortunately have to have the brain and be responsible for this. But that comes later in the training.
Yeah. And for sure, like I always think to myself, we train a dog in a discipline where actually we have no real grasp of what is happening. We have only little idea of how scent behaves and acts and performs. So I really try to stay away from the dog learning with the odor after giving them the idea of what to search for. And there have been different approaches. I talked to many different trainers about this. And I think what I've learned from you, and also back then from Tobias, of course, is that I want my dog also to understand what to search for, having a high sniffing intensity. And then I also let them search in their own way to find out how they work the best before I start, except for the lineups, before I start putting too much structure on the dog and guide them through a room. And other trainers, and it makes sense as well, told me no, they would rather put more structure on it in the very beginning because they say the dog gets loose itself later on. Anyways, so what have been your thoughts and what was your progression? How did you start the detection when you started working on detection? Did you just let the dogs run loose? Were you guiding them? Did you, use a target stick to lead the dogs? or was it basically natural and you just worked like this?
So, as far as I have seen, there has been no studies showing what is more or less effective when it comes to this. And my experience so far is that it really doesn't matter. You will arrive at the same end result anyway, whether you start off having the dog just doing free range sniffing or very structured. As long as the dog gets a chance to learn that it's just the target odor that triggers the indication, I have not seen any difference in the end result. Just seems to be different routes to the same end.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yes, it is.
So, like, my thoughts are, since we know the dogs are like scanning us and having us in their mind so much, because that's what a dog is, and checking out what we are up to, I try to not make them to gain too many ideas that I could help them in any way. So I would rather leave the dogs in front alone, not reacting to unwanted behavior like questioning or things like that.
And I agree. But if you take into consideration that training a detection dog may take 3 months, and then it should start to work operationally, and then the handler needs to be able to guide the dog, because the dog simply doesn't have any understanding of what the task is, that we want to find all of the explosives or all of the narcotics. The dog is just searching for something that may bring the reinforcement, and it does so based on the expectation we have created where the targets may be hidden. And since operational dogs are working in new contexts constantly, the dog handler will have to make sure the dog is within 5 or 10 centimeters from all the spots. The dog will just go where it thinks the narcotics or explosives is hidden. So it depends. If for narcotics dogs, usually you can be more sloppy because it's not really important what they miss. It's more important that they find. But usually when it comes to explosive dogs, it's the opposite. It's very important that they don't miss a lot of explosives. And then the strategy and protocol and training has to be a bit different.
And you just talked about like spending time at the brick wall for around 1 week, or training a detection dog in 3 months. So most people will hear this and say like, how is that even possible? But of course, in many authorities, there is just not more time given to the handlers to spend their time maybe in the dog school and run through a certain course. And at the end, you have this exam. Of course, they keep hopefully learning and improving and generalizing, etc. So these time setups are like the possibilities are limited, of course, but you could get quite far in this amount of time.
For sure, with detection, for sure, because it's relatively uncomplicated. But you would reach a certification level, but that's just the start of the dog's career.
Exactly.
That's like taking the driver's license when you're 18. Most of us were not the best drivers at 18. That comes, maybe we peak around, I don't know, 50, where I am right now. I just guess it's like that with the dogs as well. They peak 2 or 3 years after the first certification test.
Yeah, makes sense. So my question now for this actually is, when you have like a certain goal in your view to reach in a certain period of time, And we talked about the principle-based training and also about the rule-based training. Was those the terms? And we saw in this graph that the rule-based training makes it possible that you might have a fast improvement of behavior, a fast learning in the very beginning. But even a fall down when it gets more complex and etc. Whereas the principle-based training has a slower level of rise in the skill set of certain behaviors, but shows a bigger improvement when it gets more complex and more detailed and more scenario-based maybe. So the longer you stay in the program, you start to understand more and therefore be able to learn faster. But could you maybe in the words that you put it yesterday, describe what the differences are and maybe have one or two examples?
I can try, at least. I think the rule-based learning is, for example, following a progression plan. So if I give a dog handler a progression plan of maybe 100 steps, how to train the indication, the systematic search. So then the dog handler can follow this step by step by step. And then they can have quite rapid progression without really understanding the underlying principles of learning or overshadowing, etc. But at some point, they will find difficulties in their work where it's clear to them that I've just been following this recipe. I cannot apply it on new scenarios. And then they will be lost. And the opposite would be if I show up here with the dog handlers and say that for the next 2 weeks, we will just talk about basic learning theory. And I ask them to read scientific papers on everything from operant and classical conditioning to overshadowing and different reinforcement schedules, all these things that we use every day. But if we cannot really apply them immediately, it may be hard for many dog handlers to keep the interest in it. But if we manage to understand these basic underlying principles, and they are not that many, then we can apply them in all situations with the dogs. So then we can rise far above the simple steps of the progression plan, because the progression plans can just describe so much of the variation that dog teams will encounter.
What are those principles? Is it understanding the learning theory, knowing what behavior is and how to manipulate it?
So I would say you can get away knowing very few principles, and what is more important than knowing them is to apply them. So if we go to the simplest one, the operant conditioning model, that's the basis of all dog training, whether we want it or not. That is what we actually use. And if we understand that the definition of a punishment is something that decreases the frequency of a behavior, and the definition of a reinforcement is something that increases the frequency of a behavior, then we can plan the training and we can assess the training we have made. If we haven't had an increase in the frequency of behavior, well, then it hasn't been reinforced. Whether we was aiming at that or not is not interesting. It clearly hasn't occurred. So if we understand that and apply it, and overshadowing is one of the other principles. We have Premack's principle, and all of these, I would say, are known to almost all dog trainers and professional dog handlers. But what I see, at least, is that the really successful and well-performing dog handlers and dog trainers are the ones who also apply them.
Yes.
Maybe they don't know
Yeah.
more of the fancy advanced learning theory, but they apply the basics. And that's what makes the big difference. I don't know if that was a good explanation. It was a long one, at least.
Yes. What I hoped for was the example also for our guys to, like the military. And when you get into the military, that you follow this rule-based. So this was very visual.
So just tell me what you want me to say, and I will say it.
No. It was perfect. It was perfect. That's the case with expectancy. So no, but it makes a lot of sense, and I think again when people hear or see this graph, they think like, okay, no, we have to work with principle-based training only, but it's like it's not one or the other. I think we have to start understanding, especially and I see this in young trainers who get very deep into the learning theory, that they try to do training shaping only or modeling only or operant conditioning only, no classical conditioning, which is not the idea. But when learning about these principles, we have to separate them, so we can talk about this and that's a model for this is a graph for that, there is a video where we talk about this topic. But in practical work, it all gets together somehow. And a rule-based training doesn't mean that we skip the progression plans. It's still a nice tool to work with, to not lose our path of and not losing the overview of where we want to go to, and also to understand why we have been successful until now, because we can just check, okay, these were the goals that we have passed.
So I would say both are necessary, both the rules-based learning and the principles-based learning, but neither of them is sufficient enough. So we need the rules-based learning, but without the principles, we will quickly get lost.
Yeah.
And if you just have principle-based learning, that's the typical academic person who knows a lot of theory, but cannot convert it into practical dog training. So we really need both of them.
Yeah.
And it's perfectly fine if some people are more into the principles and some are more into the practical rules-based learning. But we need both.
Yeah. Yeah, but this was again, like, I've heard you talking about these things, and I just had an interesting phone call with a friend of mine in Germany. He also works for a big authority there, and never mind, this is another story. But now I lost the point. But I have no idea what I'm talking about.
But you made it clear you have one friend in Germany.
I have at least one friend in Germany, and he works in a big authority. No, that was not the point. It was about the training dogs. Let's talk about training dogs.
Yes.
Great. No, that's what it was. We listen to these things. We see it in the presentations, and sometimes we think like, of course, we have seen the model of operant conditioning, classical conditioning so many times it gets boring. But throughout these repetitions, we start thinking in a different way, because we can already apply a lot more experience, find examples of our own training, etc., and things that we have seen, and we compare it. So in these past 2 days, I think for myself, I have again understood these two examples of the rule-based and principle-based training a lot better. To maybe it's not that important, but it's just nice to understand things and to think of them in a different way when you apply them and when you go into the training center or on the field and work it through. And I think that's also important for those who think only practical exercises counts. Understanding why the practical thing works, I think that's, at least for a trainer, very helpful to be able to explain why and how those things work.
It's critical.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if you're just surprised how good or bad things work without having any idea of why, it's very hard to have structured training from that point.
Yeah.
So at least the trainer needs to understand it. But I think in many agencies, it's not really acknowledged how much training the dog handler does. Even if they don't have 16 hours of designated training time per week for the dog handler, every time the dog handler actually takes the dog out of the car, things will be reinforced or punished.
Yeah.
Even if it's not called training in the week schedule. Yeah. So the dog handlers, they really, really train their dogs a lot also in the everyday life. Yeah. So the more they know about the principles, the easier it is for them to apply them, of course.
Definitely. And that's what I liked. I think in one of our first podcasts, we talked also about traits for trainers or handlers, and you said, stay curious. And it's not, what's the English term? In German it is selbstverständlich. Like it's not sure that everyone thinks that way or acts that way, but staying curious is so much fun to discover new things and start to understand things that you thought that you understood or know already in a better way. Or see them under a different light.
And I think it's important to acknowledge that staying curious, that can be a goal in of itself, which it is, I think, for example, you. So you get reinforced by learning new things. You read a lot of books, you talk to a lot of people. So you get reinforced by that. And I think it's just as good with people who are dog handlers, and they are not actually, the curiousness is curiousness. Curiosity is not the end goal, but it's the beer.
Yes.
The end goal is
too little beer.
The end goal for them is to be able to protect themselves or their colleagues, searching for explosives, for example. And then the curiosity becomes an important means to reach that end goal. And that is just as important as a driver for curiosity.
In a perfect world, do you think it would be smarter to have more trainers that prepare and train dogs and guide them then together with their handlers, rather than having handlers being forced to try to learn so much about dog training?
That was a leading question when they used the word being forced to learn so much about dog training.
Yeah.
But what I think it's mainly from an economic point of view. I think it's good that the dog handlers learn a lot about dog training because of what we spoke of just before.
Yes.
That they continuously train the dogs whether they want to or not. But from an economic point of view, I think it's better if you have people who are devoted to doing the basic training of the dogs, becoming really good at that, and then giving the dog to the dog handler. So the dog handler doesn't have to spend time doing the really basic stuff, which they are probably not as good at doing either.
Yeah, because they only do it maybe, if you sum it up, 3 times in their career, when they get 3 dogs. And even more critical, I think, is as soon as they run into problems. Because the problems are, it's a bigger deal, I think, to get rid of the problem-causing components, finding the triggers or dealing with the consequences that could cause and the problem and keep it going. So, I always think, how could it be done in a more effective way? Apart from other problems like the selection, the poor selection of dogs, and the minimum of the budget that is open for buying dogs, etc. I think it could be done in a lot more clever way.
It could. So right now, what grinds my gear is that there is such a wastage of money, because in some units they may have a police or military working dog handler training their dogs for 6 months or sometimes a year, and a full-time employed person for 1 year, that costs a lot of money. But the problem is that that's from another account than from where they, for example, buy dogs. So it's never visualized how expensive this way of training dogs really is. So in many countries where the dog trainer is responsible for training the dog, a fully trained dog costs $100,000 or more, because they have spent 6 months or even 1 year training this dog. And that's crazy expensive compared to if they buy a prepared dog that has been trained by a professional trainer, whether it's at the agency or a private company. I mean, they can easily buy such a dog for 1/10 of that cost. And then the dog handler is up and running and can actually be operational much quicker, which will again save money and time. So this is crazy, but it has to do with administrative issues, that the costs are not placed where they actually belong.
And do you talk about these trained dogs on the private sector, or are these actually authorities who would spend that amount of money for dogs?
So authorities are the ones spending most money buying dogs, both from private companies and from their own breeding and training programs. And well, it's a trade-off. If a government has its own breeding program, the selection, the basic training, and then the operational dog handlers, a dog, if I make a rough estimate, costs somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000 because of maybe 40% of the dogs that are born in the breeding program actually make it to the first certification. And then the other 60%, they get lost along the way, but there has been money and time invested in them as well. And then the dog handler will then have to continue the training, compared to if they, as they do in other units, they buy pre-trained dogs, and then they don't have to deal with all the dogs that are not passing through the health or other criteria. But then again, if there's war in Europe and people cannot go to the Netherlands and buy dogs, and it would have been better to breed them on their own, in their own governmental program. So it's pros and cons with everything, but it's always extremely more expensive to have your own breeding program and have your own dog handlers train the dogs.
Yeah. Sure. So they should use their situation and learn more from it, maybe.
Well, but it depends if there is. I mean, I know about dog training, but I don't really have a good overview of the global politics.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we are closer to a war than I know, and then it would be clever to have your own breeding program.
Yeah.
So I think someone else than me should make that assessment.
No, we will not talk about politics here. Okay. Another point that I wanted to strive before we go to the overshadowing topic is the successive approximation. And also this is one that is like a red line throughout the workshops and lectures that we have learned from you and that we followed. So to the listeners who might not be that familiar with this term successive approximation, what is it? And actually what I thought when I took this note is, what's the opposite?
So the opposite is trial and error.
Okay.
In the dog training context, at least. Successive approximation is just a fancy term for saying that we gradually and in small steps get closer and closer to the end goal.
Step-by-step training.
Yes.
Lately I started really to use AI, ChatGPT and things like this. So of course I asked it what it is in German, and it gave me some descriptions and examples for physics and maths and engineering, etc. So they just tried to calculate in the direction of where they want to get until a certain point where a criteria is met or is close enough for their end goal. And then I asked it to describe it for me with the overall topic dog training. And actually I didn't finish reading it because then we went for another practical exercise, but it started with shaping. And it's not wrong, but it's
no, it's not.
It's I think it was a little poor description, but
I would say shaping is just one zoom click out, because shaping is also having a clear goal and then breaking that behavior down into smaller steps.
Sure.
And training one part at the time, but without having looked successive approximation up in Webster's dictionary, I would say that with successive approximation, it doesn't have to be a behavior that is split into smaller pieces. It can, and often is, just a matter of distance or time.
Yeah. No, but it's a great thing to think of. I think also when it comes to create progression plans and think your way through in theory from where you want to get to and how to just build brick on brick towards this goal. It helped me a lot. And that's again a funny thing, like some of those terms and principles, etc. Those things we follow them without knowing it in many cases.
Yeah, knock on wood.
Yes, 3 times. But I think this is not wood.
No, it's not. Because if you follow them without thinking about it, well, then it's really not a necessary principle to consider. But to your surprise, very many people don't. And it's not because they are stupid or ignorant, but it's because they are focusing on something else in this exercise.
Yeah, I know it from other topics that I do, where we don't follow the knowledge that we would have from other branches. And it's crazy how, I don't know who said it in these words, like human beings are such poor learners. It's so hard for us to generalize knowledge from one topic to another.
It is.
And it's very, we could say interesting or depressive.
But I think to our excuse, no, it's not an excuse, but I think dogs are even more context dependent. So I agree, it's very hard for me and for us as humans to generalize knowledge. And I think it helps to realize that we're poor at it, but also to realize that dogs are even struggling more with this. So in order for them to generalize, we need to invest a lot of thought and time.
Yeah, definitely. But it's a cool thing. I like those fancy sounding terms and headlines.
And everything sounds better in English. Maybe not Fingerspitzgefühl. That sounds best in German, but
definitely.
all other terms.
Yes, like sauerkraut. No, or Wiener Schnitzel. There is no such word in English. It actually sounds horrible if they try to pronounce it. But we will have a really great dinner today at the Hotel Post in Melk. So everyone listening, you should visit the spot. Okay, but we leave it like this. Successive approximation is a smart way to try to get closer to your end goal.
Yes, and it's one of these extremely simple principles that most of us fail to actually use in practice.
Yeah, but I think because people are too stressed and they are not, what's the English term for Geduld? They are not humble, but they check the time, they want to get there quicker. And successive approximation means, again, like the principle-based training, sometimes the beginning takes a little longer and the results are not seen that quickly. So when you work through the progression plan, it's like goal for goal for goal, and you do many reps on training steps to reach the goals, and it just happens that you are successful because there's almost no room for being unsuccessful. And sometimes I have the feeling that sometimes handlers or trainers are setting up an exercise and show it and are like, when does the failure happen?
Yeah.
To see, look, it doesn't work. and then it just works fine. So that's also maybe it's a cultural thing in Europe that we like to wait for problems and failure to deal with it, rather than taking the time to go for to work for success. I think there has been, wasn't it in the book Grit, where they compared the Asian kids, like, this is not politically correct, but the Asian kids with the Western kids, and they presented an exercise that is not solvable, and the Western kids just quit after a short period of time because they understood, okay, this exercise can't be solved. But the Asian kids kept going, and then they just said, okay, exercise has ended. They have just tried to figure out, maybe through principle-based training, trying out different principles, but also successive approximation to somehow get there. Maybe it's a European Western problem.
Well, I I haven't sampled enough cultures in dog training to be able to say for sure, but I think not.
Not
From what I have seen, Europeans are not better or worse than any others when it comes to this.
Okay.
We all in the dog training business seem to want to rush things, which makes sense. But the problem is that the quickest way is successive approximation. It is not trial and error to take big steps to see, can the dog do this? Can the dog do this? Yeah. And sometimes that's not really, it's counterintuitive that it's quicker to take small steps.
Yeah. Patience was the word I was looking for. We're not patient enough in many times. And
the only difference I see is that, and now I sound like the old grumpy man I am,
yes,
that it comes with age and experience, because I can see more experienced people doing it with successive approximation than I see young and new and enthusiastic.
But that's an interesting point, I think, because that's something I have realized trying to see myself from the inner eye, that I have learned through the years, of course, having trust in your plan. And you see others run into certain problems, but you just tell them, keep on going. It's okay. You will get there.
Yes.
So when I remember myself doing the first online progression plan with you, I don't know how many steps it had back then. It was around maybe 70 steps or I think something like this. And in between we had around 20 steps of laser directionals, and it took me over a year to get to the point. And I remember asking you, how far have we got? Because back then you always unlocked only 3 goals ahead.
Yes.
And it was like driving through the fog. Yes. I was happy with the things I saw, but I didn't know where else to get. And with the second dog, I ran through it quicker, and then we started understanding the principles and also finding our own ways through it. And now also knowing, having the trust in the plan, I have to check out another word which is important in this.
The process. I think that sounds great in English. Trust the process.
Yeah.
And I think that's a mistake I made then, not just allowing you to see the next 3 steps in the fog, because that does not allow you to see the whole process. So that was just not very effective.
Well, it wasn't bad. It really, for me, it was, actually I still think it's a very interesting way, because now, for example, we unlock chapters in the plan. In some of these chapters, my suggestion always is to check the whole chapter, read it, watch the video clips in this chronology to get an overview of what is expected and where the journey will go to, etc. And sometimes, for some people, this is just great, because it's like, this is going to happen. And for others, it's like, however would I reach this level of performance? And so the 3 steps, I enjoyed it, but what annoyed me was not knowing how many more 3 steps would be there.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it requires that you have trust in the people who have created the plan.
Yes.
Otherwise, it would not be useful. Yeah. So I think the cons outweigh the pros when it comes to doing it like that, unfortunately.
It would be interesting to have what are they called? The character checkups. What kind of character likes to go with this or that? This would be interesting, because I liked it.
Yes. So there's probably a diagnosis for that.
So last but not least, time is flying. Wow. Let's talk about the overshadowing. And the overshadowing is not a detection topic.
No.
It's everywhere in our everyday lives and concerning dogs and not concerning dogs. But we run into this topic a lot. And so there are some parts of overshadowing that are needed and wanted, and different aspects we try to avoid it. Sometimes it's helpful in the beginning to get rid of cues, or to transform the cues from verbal or from physical or body language to verbal cues, etc. But maybe you could tell our viewers and listeners what is the overshadowing.
And then you will tell me if I told you what
Exactly.
you wanted me to tell.
Exactly.
Yes. So I would say so let's start in this, and it may be most important for a person who wants to train or handle a dog to know the difference between primary and secondary reinforcers, and then how to use these with the operant conditioning model as the framework. But after that, when a person has understood and applied that, I think overshadowing is the next principle that is very important to acknowledge, because as you said, it will affect our training and handling every day, almost in all disciplines. And one example could be when we teach the dog to sit. Then we use luring most of the time, because the dog has no understanding of the Swedish or English language. So if we say sit, it means nothing to the dog. So typically then we lure the dog to sit. We have food or a toy in the hand, put it towards and a bit upwards. And the dog will go into the position, and we can reinforce that. But then maybe we do that for 5 minutes, and after 5 minutes, there are very few dogs who will not sit when you lure them. But if we then continue luring, the luring will also become the cue. And that's not what we want. We want to replace the luring with the verbal cue, sit. And if I then make the luring at the same time as the verbal cue, if I do like this, sit, chances are that my hand movement will overshadow the verbal cue, because following this has been reinforced for the past 5 minutes, and a movement is, for most dogs, a more salient stimuli than a word, because we talk a lot and it means nothing to the dog. So then, in order to avoid the overshadowing of the movement, I need to give the new cue before the old cue. So I need to say sit and then do the luring. Then we can avoid overshadowing. And then we need to be disciplined, and that's where the handcuffs may come into picture if people cannot stay away from moving their hand. And often we think we're just doing a very small, subtle movement, but it will still overshadow the verbal cue and not give the dog a chance to understand it.
And there it's so interesting to do a video analysis when the people see, okay, when does the dog react? From the verbal cue that comes first, or a short motion.
Yes.
Okay. But I really hope that you would have another example.
But I think when it comes to overshadowing, I have an infinite amount of examples, unfortunately. You just have to tell me which one.
I'm joking. Never quit joking. Spaß nie beiseite, as Stefan says. So, of course, I think this is a great example, and especially when it comes to detection dogs, or working dogs that we are training now, is I want to have a reliable dog on verbal cues, because in many cases they will not have the chance to observe myself as a handler. So, and that's not even talking about radio-guided training. This is just about having a dog whose nose is not towards me but somewhere else. And when I give this discriminative cue, I want them to react. But for the topic detection, it would be very interesting for our listeners to understand the idea of this overshadowing when it comes to the cue of odor. Because the odor of the target odors of our dogs cue them when found, cues the dog to show certain behavior, indication behavior, whatever you want to call it, or how it should look. But we talked about contamination of training odors today and yesterday, and that there is a risk, especially with the example of saliva that gets onto the odors or on the training samples.
Yes.
What's the problem with that? Because I think this is a little thing that many people could understand and improve their training a lot, because they get more careful about how to handle those things and maybe even how to avoid it.
Yes. So I have a problem keeping myself short.
Well, I just have to go to the toilet and I'm really hungry, but take your time.
So, for example, in the beginning of the training, you may do lineups. So then you will, for example, have a lineup with 6 containers, or you may have a scent with 6 or 12 containers. And then I want my dog to indicate heroin. So I put heroin or something else. It doesn't matter what. In the containers. And if we then have the 6 containers, I have heroin in this one, and the dog is searching, and it finds the heroin here. It will stay longer here than with the other ones. So it will breathe more, and it will probably also sniff more here. So there will be some saliva and mucus from the nose. And that means this container will smell a little bit different than the other ones. And if you are then a lazy person, so I don't have my tweezer on me. You take tweezer and you move this whole container in the lineup. And the next time the dog is searching, it finds the right container. In your mind, yes, I'm rewarding the dog for indicating the heroin. In the dog's mind, yes, what smells here is my saliva.
Could be, at least there is a big...
Exactly. We don't have the control over what it is we're reinforcing the dog for. We just see that it indicates the right container. We feel happy. We can reward it.
Because we know that it's there. And that's, I think, one of the most interesting questions that you asked a few times in the past 2 days is when we watched some video clips and you asked what has been rewarded. And the people who listened and watched are in the topic. So they said, well, the indication behavior. But what did really happen? Or what did the dog really sense in the moment of hearing the secondary reinforcer or receiving the primary one?
Yes. And it's fairly easy to test what behavior do we see an increased frequency of. And what we see many times, if they don't change the container, so if they don't take out the heroin and put it in the other containers, but just move the whole container, is that the dogs will go and indicate this container because they have been rewarded for indicating that container because it smells of more mucus or saliva, or because it smells of something different, or in the worst case, because they have been touching it when moving. Because for many dogs, the handler's scent is a very salient scent. And if the dog is rewarded for indicating this container, it's quite likely that it's rewarded for indicating the handler's scent. So, and this happens a lot also when we're more advanced than the lineups. So when we start hiding, if we hide narcotics here in this book, and we send the dog to indicate it. Search indicates, we reward it. And then we're lazy, so we don't replace the target, but we send the dog from the other side, or we send a second dog to search and indicate the same. Then we also lose control of whether the dog is indicating the heroin or the saliva or mucus, or if you have been throwing a ball, the odor of the ball here. And that is one very common reason for producing false alerts in dogs.
But would you say that this is very important to think of and work on when the dog is in the early steps of odor conditioning? Because I think later on this is also a good distractor. And for sure that maybe you even used a can or a tin that another dog indicated on, but this dog was searching for Kong, and this dog now searches for explosives, and neither nor should indicate on the can where the others did an indication.
So we need to prove the dog off of these things, but if we have previously reinforced them for indicating their own saliva or other dog's saliva, it just makes the road bumpier. It will take more time. And maybe more importantly, the dog is actually not searching for explosives, which is what we think. So we will then miss more explosives than we would have needed to otherwise. So I think at least from the point where you start to imprint the dog with the actual target odor, then your sense of odor hygiene should be very high. And you need to take care that you don't create any other least common denominators than the actual target odor. And this produces all kinds of practical problems. So, for example, if we want to contaminate things, we can... I probably have... Yes, I have a washer here. We can contaminate this with explosives. We put it in a jar with explosives. And then there are some molecules of explosives on this one. And then we can place this everywhere, and the dog will sniff, indicate, and we then think, it's indicating the Semtex odor. But if I have been touching this, God forbid, the dog is probably not even recognizing the Semtex odor because my odor is overshadowing the Semtex odor.
Yes. And also your focus goes to the things you know best. So if the dog knows handler's scent best, he quicker reacts to what he knows best rather than to what he might have just learned a few days ago.
For sure.
Yeah. I think that, of course, it makes a lot of sense.
But it doesn't stop there. And that's the problem, because I think most of us will not touch the objects we want the dogs to search. But even if I have a tweezer, or in the worst case, gloves touching the article that I have contaminated with odor. So if I have had this together with Semtex, then this has caught some molecules of Semtex, but when I place it in the environment, the molecules will start to drift away. And that's necessary, because otherwise, if the molecules stick to this, there is nothing in the headspace above for the dog to actually sniff. So we need the molecules to leave. And this produces at least two new problems that will also many times create issues with detection dogs. And one is that at some point, this article will have lost so many Semtex molecules that it smells more of other things. Maybe the material it's constructed of, or maybe other things that it has been in contact with. So while I'm thinking, I'm now training my dog to search for Semtex, and it's reliably indicating the articles I have contaminated, the dog is reinforced for searching for iron circles, washers, or things that have been in contact with IKEA furniture. And that's not what I want my dog to search for. So when we use contaminated material, we need to make sure that it is really producing a strong odor of what we want the dog to search for. And that means most of the times it's disposable items. We can use them once, but then we cannot put them back in the jar together with the other ones, because then they will contaminate them. And it will also have lost some of its explosive. So we need to throw them away. So it's quite expensive to use contaminated articles.
Sure. The overshadowing is also something that we use on purpose when it comes to pairing, when we do odor conditioning. So there we try to overshadow the known odor, like a very small piece of Kong, for example, with the new one set. What else would come to your mind when it comes to overshadowing, where we use it or we try to avoid it? Maybe one last example.
So tracking is a good example. There we can backchain the tracking from indicating articles in the track. That's an easy way of training tracking. But then we need to make sure that the actual track overshadows the articles. Otherwise, the dog is just reinforced for searching for articles. And that's not uncommon in tracking dogs.
I had this with Ignaz. For sure. We ran into this problem where he started searching Kong rather than sticking to the track.
So then we need... So, for example, Kong pieces, they come with the benefit that the dog may be trained to indicate Kong pieces, but they have the negative side that they smell a lot. So then they will overshadow the footsteps on the ground, for example. And we want it to be the other way around. So then it's better to have our sweaty feet walk on the hard surface and have washers, small washers or small articles where the dog is staying in the contaminated area that we've been contaminating with our feet. And that's where it finds the articles and is reinforced. So if we can then make our scent from our footsteps overshadow the articles, we can make use of it. And when we want the dogs to start tracking on grass or vegetative surfaces, that's where we really need to take care. Because when I walk on grass, I leave just as much scent from me as when I walk on hard surface like concrete or tarmac. But we want the dog just to follow the scent of the human or animal, not the crushed vegetation. So we need to take care that, especially on vegetative surface, we leave a lot of scent that can overshadow the scent of the crushed vegetation. Because otherwise we're just reinforcing the dog for following the crushed vegetation. And no one wants a tracking dog like that.
No, for sure not. Yeah, that's great. So the overshadowing is something that follows us in almost everywhere in life. And thinking and talking about these things probably is the best way to start understanding them and realizing where it occurs and how it affects our training and our performance in dog training, where we could be more careful and maybe also some steps where we need it and use it. So,
yeah, and curiosity also comes into play, because we can often test, like with the tracking example. And I'm sorry if this makes your bladder explode, if I had continue talking. With the tracking, if you have a dog that follows the track on grass perfectly fine, but when the track enters a hard surface, the dog looks like the track ends there. Well, then we know the dog is following the scent of the crushed vegetation, not the scent from the human or animal. And it's good to make tests like this, where we don't expect the dog to learn anything, but we expect ourselves to learn what has actually been reinforced for this dog. And then we know, yep, it follows the track of crushed vegetation. And good. Then we can try to overshadow the crushed vegetation.
Exactly, yeah. Then it makes sense. And that's the information from failure that is...
Yes.
That is so important and so useful.
Yeah. And we can make use of it the next dog we train. Hopefully. Then we can avoid failure, and we will fail with something else instead.
Yes, sure. Great. That was awesome. I have one last question, almost last but not least, but this is from my previous guest. I had 1 or 2 episodes, I think, with Chris. So Chris is not allowed to ask any questions.
Good.
And Dr. Matthias Seewald, I showed you before who it is. Great guy, great vet. So Cool had his tooth surgery done by him. And his question is, what dog breed would describe your character? And of course it could be dog breeds. So if there is any kind of a mix in your character found, so what would it be from the many approved breeds from the FCI? And take your time.
The one that comes to mind instantly, not because I want it, but because I think it is like that, is a Labrador.
Oh.
Because
You're a great guy and hungry.
I am almost constantly hungry.
Yes.
And I am fairly motivated, but I also have a will to please, and I'm a bit afraid of the conflicts.
Okay.
So I think
I'm
if you put more it that way, Labrador than any other tough breed that I would like maybe to identify myself as.
I think Labradors are great dogs.
Yeah. So this where you were supposed to say, but you are actually Malinois. But it's okay.
No, I think it really depends on what purpose you were bred for.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
Or a Cocker Spaniel. Oh, but you're too calm for that.
Yeah, and I thought about a Cocker Spaniel, but I have an Irish person that would be very upset if I called myself Cocker Spaniel.
Okay. Now we don't want to offend anyone.
No.
Of course. Great. Is there anything you would like to announce? Oh, what is your question? That's the last question. What is your question for the next guest, not knowing who it will be?
Given what we have just been talking about, it would be, and I hope I don't put anyone on the spot here, so you have to warn them before, which you did not do with me.
No,
with this
never.
question. But it would be their worst example of overshadowing, where they have created a pattern that really made them struggle due to overshadowing?
Great question. I like those ones. Yeah, perfect. I will make a note of this one and ask it to the next one. And not yet knowing who it will be, I have two women in mind. Far too less women on the podcast. But there will be two coming definitely. And I will not tell you guys now who it will be, but I'm very looking forward to it. Sooner or later they will find the time, or I will find the time to interview them. Great. So anything else you would like to point out? Anything, any events or courses, workshops?
No, not really. If people have been using our progression plans in the app, I'm very curious for feedback.
Yeah.
Especially what steps they struggled with and which needs to be replaced or split into smaller steps. That would be really helpful.
That's a great point. Yeah. So everyone using the app, don't hesitate to reach out and offer some constructive critics. And yeah, I think this is it. Thank you, Jens, for taking your time.
Thank you.
And it's always a pleasure listening to your thoughts and explanations, and a lot to learn for all of us. So thanks again. Thank you guys for listening or watching the show. It has not been very, very powerful. I think we're both a little bit tired and thirsty and hungry. But yeah, thanks for listening. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, to the podcast on whatever app you listen to it, on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, etc. Give us a rating. Let us know what we should do better in the future, and also send us some options or suggestions for topics that I could talk about with my next guests. So take care. See you the next time. And we're going to have a great dinner. Bye-bye.
Good. Super. I also need to pee, actually.
Yes.
But you can go first.
Go ahead. There are 3 toilets.
Okay. I will only take one.